So as we always say, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this Privacy Rules webinar. My name is Alessandro Di Mattia. I'm Legal and Executive Officer at Privacy Rules. And today I'm joined with this fantastic panel of experts worldwide to discuss about a very relevant topic of the last weeks that is related to WhatsApp and the changes in the privacy policies. We received from you many questions in relation to which are the changes, what's happening, and how are they applied in different countries of the world. So we asked our experts to connect and gather together in order to speak about the topic. And I'm pleased to introduce you to all of them, starting from Audrey Walsh from Tanner DeWitt in Hong Kong, Stefan Matthias from Kokar in India. We also have our European expert, Markus Mirberg from Lexia Attorneys in Finland, and from the opposite side of the world, very early in the morning, Michael Niterdy from Frost Brown Todd in the US. And finally, I would like to thank Gabriel Avigdor, our Swiss member from Dataless LLC, that is going to be the moderator of this discussion. So without further delay, I would like to turn it over to you, Gabriel, and to our speaker, thanking you all for being with us and also our listeners for joining this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alessandro. It's a pleasure to play the role of the moderator today with our expert. I'm really happy to have you today for this topic that has raised some concerns and have led to some uncertainty, I would say, about what's really happening with WhatsApp. For the context, WhatsApp changed, and if you're a WhatsApp user, you know that you have received a notification in February to say WhatsApp is going to change its term of service and the privacy policy. Do you agree? And if you don't agree, well, you have to stop. So this is probably something that has had an impact, because personally, I now have to struggle between sending messages through WhatsApp to people telling me that they need to be contacted by Signal, and on Signal they are not there, so because they are using Telegram, and now they are trying to use Viber and another one that is specific paid one, which creates, I think, a very challenging way to communicate. So without further ado, I think we need a bit of clarification with all of this situation, I think, that has been created only with a pop-up. And I would like to start asking the question about the fact that we could have WhatsApp or Facebook done something differently. Why do we see that this has created a huge mess? And I will suggest maybe Padraig to start with this. Thanks.
I think one of the things with this, Gabriel, is it's an interesting situation, because if you look at the substance of what actually changed in the policy and in the privacy terms, it didn't move the needle that much in respect of the substance of what was there before and what was there after. Yes, there were changes made, but the changes weren't a wholesale change in the nature, the broad range of the data that was being collected. There were some changes, and we'll get onto this later, in respect of how that data may be used by participants in that message flow. But the actual substance wasn't radical, but the response to it was quite radical. And there are a couple of things you could point to for that. I would point to maybe three things. One is, if you look at the way that people were primarily alerted in respect of the change, for most people, and there are a lot of users of WhatsApp, I think it's around 2 billion users around the world, so that's a lot of people. For most people, the first occasion in which they became aware of it was when that pop-up screen appeared and it read like an ultimatum. So that's not a good position to start from in respect of informing people about changes, where people feel coerced or so forth, because that feels as if you're maybe not respecting the trust that should be there between the platform and the users in question. So that was perhaps in hindsight a strategic error in terms of the communication. The second thing is simply by virtue of the nature of WhatsApp being part of the Facebook group of companies, it just poses challenges. What that means is it's not, and that's not necessarily an adverse comment in and of itself in respect of Facebook, but it is an organization or a group that has had a checkered history in respect of its relationship with personal data protection and so forth. What that means in terms of managing communication is that it's a bit of a minefield, and you need to navigate that very carefully. And there may have been differences in how they go about doing that. What you had a heightened sensitivity in respect of users who are aware that WhatsApp is one of the Facebook group of companies. Then you receive a pop-up window saying, agree by such a date, or please stop using the service. And then if you go further and try and understand, well, what is it that I'm being informed about? And you try and read the policy itself. Perhaps as a lawyer, I can read it and I can understand what it says. But if I was not a lawyer, in some parallel universe, that might be, a happier existence. And I started trying to read the policy, I would struggle to find out what was really changing, because it isn't presented in a way that is easy to absorb the information that's contained in the policy. So if you look at some GDPR standards and some equivalent standards in other data protection regimes around the world, a lot of emphasis is about using clear, simple language so that data subjects can understand what the principles are in respect of the policy. You might look at the WhatsApp policy and wonder, was there a different way that it could be presented so that a lot of technical information could be absorbed a bit better? And one of the contrasts is if you look at the reaction of WhatsApp to the, what you might call the fallout from that particular pop-up screen that requested people to consent or to cease using. If you look at how they've communicated since, a lot more emphasis has been placed on the clarity and the simplicity of the message. That wasn't done beforehand in quite the same way, and that in hindsight might have been something that they would look back on and regret.
Thanks, Padraig, for this explanation, and I think we can see that this has created a lot of noise, and all this noise potentially is the whole confusion about, well, what are they going to achieve? So I think this, for the next question, is why are they doing this now, and what are they trying to achieve? What is the purpose really of this change now? Maybe Stephen, if you would like to say something on this one.
Sure, Gabriel. I would break the concerns into kind of two buckets. The first one related to Facebook, and the second one relates to uh, business use. So, WhatsApp, the main reason for these changes is WhatsApp is trying to bring businesses into WhatsApp, where within the app you can, um, you know, buy and sell products. And when you do that, the information you share with those businesses that are selling on WhatsApp will be treated differently, partly because the information is given to a third party. It's not given to WhatsApp alone, but because those businesses want to then use that information, particularly on Facebook. That's the main reason for these changes. The second one relates to sharing content with, sharing information with Facebook. Now, this is not necessarily new in the sense that right from 2016, this has been there to some extent. But I think that privacy concerns in 2021 are much more than in 2016. And Facebook is bigger, WhatsApp is bigger, and it, I think, has just renewed a fear and a concern over sharing information with Facebook. But the main reason for these changes is really to be able to bring uh, business selling of goods and services into WhatsApp. There's a interesting deal they have signed with GeoMart, which is a fairly big company in India, and you can GeoMart will be providing uh, grocery sales services within WhatsApp in India. And so that's a good example of what they intend to do. And I understand that in China, WeChat has been doing something like this for quite a while. So that's really the main reason for these changes.
Thanks. That's a lot of good information. It's interesting also to see a bit how to expand the activities of a service that was designed to be a free service for only users, individual users, and now we see that there's really an expansion of this service, also because of the deal potentially that was so huge when purchasing WhatsApp. So it's a return in investment potentially that we see that is going to this direction. So I think we may be interested to understand exactly if the new policy is the same globally or not, and if not, what's the difference? Maybe Mike, could you let us know a bit about the differences, if there's any?
And I'll let Marcus speak a little bit about the main difference here is that this is not going to apply to the European Union and to the countries that are affected by the GDPR. Here in the United States, still all the changes are going to apply. What we like to refer in the privacy world to the United States to the Wild Wild West, because there's still no overarching privacy policy or regulation, even though the California law is really taking shape and is starting to influence people here in the United States now, that because of the change in the administration and because of both houses of Congress being in the same party as the presidency, we're hopeful that there will be some type of overarching legislation so that we might have something to be able to come to us someday and say, no, wait a minute, yeah, it doesn't apply here in the United States. But right now in the United States, all these changes will apply. But maybe Marcus has some things to say about the differences in Europe.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And actually, as we have heard and read that that the new privacy policy will not be applied to EU EEA, so there will be in the future some differences, but actually I can't say that clear which are actually the actual small different differences, because already now there, but it's regarding, of course, mostly regarding the third party and sharing the data. So but are there others? So actually, I think that's like on the basis of the processing. That's like typically those two, which they have to be more careful regarding the EU, because fortunately for the EU, or how you think it, GDPR is quite careful, for example, regarding the grounds, and I assume that it will be also a question about what happens in practice regarding sharing the data and regarding receiving the consent, because it's in GDPR specifically requires freely given, specific, informed, and to be revoked consent. And by that, for example, is it like freely given for all these purposes? And can you revoke the consent? I think that's in addition to actual wording in the terms, it will be in practice really impossible to like process the data aligned with these requirements. I'm not jumping, Gabriel, a little bit to GDPR in overall, and of course the other parties, like what makes it different is of course the international transfer of data. Because in the EU, it's the WhatsApp Irish entity, But if the new functions and sharing data with all those business entities around WhatsApp would definitely require international data transfers. And you have to be at the moment quite careful regarding these, because there's no privacy shield anymore. And SCCs, the standard contractual clauses, are a little bit under construction, as they say. There has been new rulings regarding the additional or supplemental measures you need to take. And even the bigger players, or mostly them maybe, are really, it's not that easy to process their personal data regarding these environments, especially regarding to US. So really a bit complicated answer, but like these are the major facts behind the difference, and having like EU as or handling EU as a separate area, not covered by the newest changes.
Thanks. So I think we can highlight a few things from what you said. So basically, we understand that today we have two areas in the world in the WhatsApp mind. You have the European region, and I think if you have a look at the scope, it's 47 jurisdictions. So it's a bit more than EU and Switzerland. So you split between those 47 countries and the rest of the world, and we see that, for example, the US, well, it's just about implementing the changes, and that's okay. But we hear that in the EU, there are some challenges with the law. So the law just is built in a way that it's not that easy to say, let's just change it, because you may have data transfer problems, you may have legal basis problem. Is that okay to use consent or not? Is that the right legal basis also to do that? So many things that potentially would explain why the EU today has not changed anything, because it's not mature enough to say, let's just implement and make user confronted to the changes, right? So I think that's interesting to see those differences in the legislation. And jumping into the next question, maybe you, Marcus. So is there any impact today continuing to using WhatsApp in Europe?
So not directly. So, and actually we haven't received, at least from the authorities, the data protection board or any others. So we haven't been informed bigger concerns about like that, or we have the same concerns have since the GDPR came into effect 2018, but like nothing new has popped up. There has been some authorities in some part of the EU raising up the questions and taking the questions up to the EDPB, but it's so far, at least I haven't seen exact statements saying that, hey, now we should change or stop the use immediately, believing or being informed that actually there will be no changes in the EU. By saying that, I'm not saying or stating that it's quite clear and the terms are fine to the final end. But of course, was a question and regarding all the changes already a time ago for the e-privacy directive in the EU. We like informed and had like more stronger requirements regarding the privacy of communications. So I think that's one of the biggest questions, of course, the privacy of communication, which should be not even affected in the rest of the world, I assume. So maybe we should talk a little bit also about the two different angles, like the communications and the data privacy here, because it's like two different rights to be protected.
Yeah, so I think there's a question that probably the audience would be interested to hear, because one of the key message that, let's use this term, that's the key message that WhatsApp is sending to the users, is that they cannot see the content of the messages or the voice or the video, right? So what is really the concern, actually, if they cannot see anything? It's encrypted, so basically they cannot touch the data, and this is really very strong as a communication and an added value message for the customers. So I would like to ask to you the question, so okay, this is encrypted, so are there any privacy concern at all for users using WhatsApp? Or maybe Padraig, would you like to, or Stephen, would you like to say something on that?
I can speak initially, and maybe Stephen, by all means, do follow on. But I think what you can distinguish between here is what you might call the primary data, which is the data that's contained in the communication itself. So the content of the message, the photo that's being shared. And WhatsApp, from the outset, they've built their model on the basis that it's end-to-end encrypted, meaning that they do not have the keys to be able to have access to and to view those messages. That's one level of data. But there's another level of data, which is sometimes referred to as metadata, or another term that's sometimes used is data exhaust, which is other aspects or features of data. And that is something that is not covered by end-to-end encryption. Now that can include a number of things. It can include timestamps and respective messages. It can include location data. It can include IP addresses. And not all of that may be things that WhatsApp is specifically logging and recording. That metadata has become quite rich and valuable, and that's something that's not necessarily dealt with in the core messaging that WhatsApp has given. So, and I think on this is something that I know that Mike has considered and has thought about also. So.
But this is an interesting. All of this, I think, comes together for these several reasons. Is that and we've talked about this a little bit offline. Is that really, if Facebook's name was not involved in this might not have ever made the news. And that is because Facebook is obviously the leader in the field of all social media and data collection throughout the world. And they have been for some time. And with being the leader in the field, you get all of the good and the bad. And when you try new things. And so what they have routinely done, and what WhatsApp has here too, is they kind of lead off with, well, we don't know what you're saying to other people. We're encrypting all of your communications, like you just said, Padraig, that we don't see the pictures. We have no way of knowing what it is you're doing, and you're in control of who sees what. And that's great. But the point is that, and also as Stephen said earlier, a lot has changed since 2016. Really, the world knows that. We get that you're not, and we don't want you looking at our messages, knowing what we're saying. But the truth is that there's so much more value in the data about that data. That the reason that they want to do this and that WhatsApp is doing this is because it's just another connection for more data about these contacts. And when you put all of this data together and you are able to store it and compute it, you're really learning a lot more about the individuals than if you even had access to the actual communication or the actual picture. If you're able to keep this data for a long amount of time and put it into subsets, you've got a great customer list to pass on to your business partners. And that's the issue with all this, is, and the privacy concern, is that we get that you're not listening in on my phone calls. We get that you're not reading my emails and my text messages. But you need to be upfront about what you are doing, which is we're keeping track of all of your contacts. And I don't mean that we're looking at your contacts. What I mean is that who you're the numbers that you're sending to, the data about the data. We're able to put it all together, and that's how we do our business. And that's fine because we're free. We have to make money somehow. So the question is, why not just be upfront about it? And that leads to, if you'll allow me just one more second, the one thing that we do in the United States, even though that we don't have an overarching privacy regulation, is we do have the Federal Trade Commission, which has a Federal Trade Commission Act, which tries to stop unfair and deceptive trade practices. And that's where this comes into play, and where the FTC has been on Facebook and other social media companies in the past. And that is to make sure that what you're telling your consumers that you're doing in the privacy policy actually bears out in your practice. Okay, so, and that's what's a little bit concerning about just, leading off with, well, we're not reading your messages, we're not looking at your pictures. Okay, we understand that, but tell us what you are doing. Be a little bit more explicit in how you are using the data. And these broad terms, and that's another thing that's really led to a lot of this confusion and flight to the other carriers, is the broad terms in which you're telling us that you're going to start sharing leads us to think that you're probably going to be doing more than you should be doing.
I wanted to actually bring your attention to a particular clause in the privacy policy dealing with how we work with other Facebook companies. And essentially, it says you will share data with these companies for improving their services and your experiences using them, such as making suggestions for you, for example, of friends or group connections, or of interesting content, personalizing features and content, helping you complete purchases and transactions, and showing relevant offers and ads across the Facebook company products. Now, continuing with what Michael said, when you read this, your first question will be, how are you going to personalize features and content if you can't see my content? You're saying all you can see is my name, who I'm messaging, when I messaged, and other metadata like that. You can't see my content. So how are you personalizing all of this? And so there is a kind of confusion that, maybe for Facebook, it's something else. And so I think they really do need to come out and say, uh, this is what we're doing, this is how we're actually doing it, and we are not doing it by accessing your messages or your calls. But unless they explain how they're doing it, there is that confusion, that's that fear that our content is being shared with Facebook, so that Facebook can provide content to us and suggest products to be purchased and things like that.
Thanks all, and I think it really reveals that it's not just about encryption and that they do not see anything. It's about what else do they do outside of the messages, and it's all about this. And we can see there's metadata, and metadata is data a bit about data, and it could be very rich for a company to have access to this. And I think now we've been talking a bit about the user, personal users, but what could be the privacy concern for businesses, for data protection officers within organizations? I don't know if you want to jump on that, Stephen, as well.
I think that's something that's still kind of unanswered. Uh, I think the fear here is for users that their content will be shared with Facebook, their content will be shared with businesses. In terms of what businesses' concerns are, that's something that's really not been discussed very much so far. And I guess the main concern there would be, as a business, what you're doing with your users, if that's getting shared with WhatsApp, with Facebook, will they use that for other businesses who may be competitors and so on? But I think this is something that's not really come out into mainstream thinking so far.
Thanks. And if there's any reaction of someone else, unless there is a reaction, I can jump into the next question, which is, I think, interesting because we talk about user that have that is using, you know, WhatsApp as a messaging app, and but WhatsApp is a Facebook company. So what if you do not have a Facebook account? Is that, how does it work if you do not have a Facebook account? And is this, are those changes valid actually if you are not a Facebook user? Maybe Padraig, if you would like to say some words about this.
Sure. Actually, this is one of the things that the Hong Kong Privacy Commissioner touched upon, maybe not as directly as that, but in respect of the public comments that the Privacy Commissioner here has made about the change in the WhatsApp policies. What the argument was that if you don't have a Facebook account, then all of these changes are utterly redundant and irrelevant to you. This is just to explain the line of argument. And therefore, you should have almost an opt-out type provision where you can continue to use WhatsApp, but within the domain in which you have been presently using it so far. The nature of the changes in question may not necessarily, lead to that consequence, because what WhatsApp is trying to enable is in respect of business services. They want to, I guess, or Facebook itself wants to promote the ability of businesses to use Facebook servers, so that if you're communicating with a business that is using Facebook servers, then there are the possibility for those businesses to then use other types of services in relation to Facebook to assess those messages and provide marketing activities that are, to use the parlance, customized and tailored to what your particular interest may be. So that is something that is happening outside of you being a Facebook account holder as a user. That's something that's happening on the receiver of the message. So that's one instance in which you may not necessarily have a Facebook account yourself, but nonetheless, the policy they would hope would still continue to apply to you, because they want to enable and facilitate particular use of that data by the businesses you may be communicating with by using WhatsApp.
Thanks. And I think this is really one of the question about communication and the way WhatsApp has been operating with users, because in terms of transparency, we've seen in the past that if some users remember, there was a choice to say, I would like to opt out from me sharing data with Facebook, and then suddenly it disappeared. So the option was no longer available. And I think this is one of the question is that shall WhatsApp just be more transparent and just give this opt out again, or how granular does WhatsApp needs to be with the user with this? But maybe that's not the question, because it's about many other things, right? But in a summary, I think we need to ask the question whether are those changes illegal in any way? It's maybe not an easy question, but is this change breaking the law, which makes this potentially void, cancelled, so that you continue using the service under the previous terms?
One of the things that's interesting here, and far be it from me to publicly say that WhatsApp is breaking the law in Hong Kong, but one of the things that's interesting here is that the Hong Kong Privacy Commissioner has come out on 2 occasions and made public statements about this policy change. And the Privacy Commissioner has stopped short of saying that the policy constitutes a breach in respect of mandatory data protection laws in Hong Kong, but has nonetheless expressed concern and highlighted a couple of aspects and features of the changes, requested more time, it requested opt-out facilities, requested more transparency and information in respect of the contemplated changes. So, on the whether or not it constitutes a breach in law would require quite a bit of analysis. On balance, it probably not is the answer, But that's not necessarily saying that it's being a good citizen in respect of what should or should not be done within the framework of what's expected as an accountable data user in Hong Kong. Not that I'm commenting on that, I'm just mentioning that answering one does not necessarily answer the other.
And I think maybe we can do a quick roundtable around the question of can we just force user, or can we, when we do an update of a privacy policy or terms of use, is that how does it work in your country basically when you have to update a privacy policy and then you ask the user to just tick or just accept? How maybe we can start with the US. How does it work when you kind of into bracket not force user but just inform users about the change of services, because this is all about just updating terms, right?
That's right. And in the United States, that is allowed currently, and that's standard practice in privacy policies to say that your continued use of this product, service, or website accepts our changes in the privacy policy. And check back often. It's on you to check back often to our privacy policy to see if any changes have been made. And so that's standard practice in the United States. And where the force comes in is, like I mentioned earlier, if it's deemed by the FTC that you're not following what it is you're saying you're doing. So and that's where we make it sound, not intentionally, I don't think, but we make it sound easier than it is to draft, especially in this new data world, to draft a policy that encompasses all of the potential ways that you might be able to use data, when technology is changing so rapidly. And so, I understand Facebook and WhatsApp's position. You want to be able to draft something that gives people notice, but at the same time gives you the ability to use data in new ways. And so that becomes very difficult. And what we see here is an attempt to have more data connections to be used by these companies to be able to make more money off of their free infrastructure that they're providing to consumers. And so the question is, are they going to be able to give notice to people about what they're doing in a way that is not deceptive?
It's interesting to see the American approach, which actually is very linked to fairness and to be sure that you tell people the truth. So in a way, you have to be transparent, and as long as you do this, it remains okay. So what about Europe, Marcus? How, when you update a privacy policy, how do you do that?
That's a really good question. And since the GDPR, it's explicitly said that actually the privacy policy or any terms shouldn't be part of any terms. So it should be a different information, and you should give the different information differently from the actual terms of use, for example, and you can't take any consent, for example, as a part of the terms. All consent requirements should, all that kind of should be taken separately, so to be informed, etc. So you can't hidden any consent. And of course, you can renew the privacy policies, or you can update the information you give about your processing of personal data. And you don't need actually any acceptance as such. But of course, if you change the scope of the use and you broaden it, you need once again a specific consent from the data subject to change it. And that's kind of, you can't just say that accept new terms and privacy policy. That applies not as such anymore in the EU. So it's a little bit different. So I think from what's happening. And one good question is here what's being discussed quite a lot, because like if like providing the services and the contract between the service provider is one of the basis for processing the data. So what can be actually agreed and by whom, at least you have to be 18, and what what is part of the contract and what is not part of the contract or the actual service. And that's, I think, one of the questions which is like coming up more and more.
Thanks. And maybe Stephen, from your jurisdiction, how does it work?
Gabriel, India doesn't have substantial privacy laws in place at the moment, but we do have a draft personal data protection bill, which is currently being reviewed by a committee of parliament. So under the draft law, we do not have even something similar to, say, legitimate interest under the GDPR. And pretty much consent is an absolute must in order to collect and process personal data. There's an interesting provision which says that the provision of the service cannot be made conditional on you giving consent for the processing of the data with regard to personal data that is not necessary for providing the service. The question really here is what is necessary? Clearly, if you need the personal data in order to actually provide the service, such as, say, your phone number in the case of WhatsApp, then that's necessary. But if you need personal data in order to monetize the service, then that's probably not necessary. So, going by that, this kind of a privacy policy would not work under India's new Personal Data Protection Act if it were enforced today. Of course, this act is on the lines of GDPR, and that again goes back to explaining why they have a different policy for Europe versus the rest of the world.
That's a very interesting point of view, which in a way is a bit not in between, but seems not so far from a European point of view, from the data protection perspective, where you said that you need to distinguish a contract from processing of personal data unless it is strictly necessary in relation to the service. So I think it's a very interesting perspective. And Padraig, do you have also your perspective on how to change a privacy policy in your jurisdiction?
With great care. In Hong Kong, actually, in fairness, it's a relatively light system compared to, say, GDPR, for instance. The way that it works is at the outset, at the point of collecting personal data, you need to inform the data subject, the type of personal data that you're collecting, and the uses that you're going to put that personal data to. And those uses also need to be proportionate and necessary and reasonable, and have those kinds of qualities. Where consent is necessary is if in the future you change the uses that you've disclosed in respect of the personal data that you've collected. So if you start using it for something new, then you need to go back to the data subject and get a specified consent, which is an express consent related to that particular new permitted use. The other situation where express consent is needed, and it's a separate, not a bundled consent, is if you intend to use personal data for the purpose of direct marketing activities. So in that situation, you would need to have the express specific consent of the data subject to the direct marketing activity in question.
Very interesting. And I think before we go to the question of the alternatives, I think there is an interesting question that is being asked. There are several, but I will take one that I think we discussed a bit offline, which is, as far as I know, the policy is not in place yet. What would you change, or do you think WhatsApp may recover to the communication mistake done? So I think it links to creativity of lawyers to correct things and to advise businesses to just do things better. Do you have any insights or creative ideas to suggest here?
Actually, WhatsApp started it by by publishing those answering to your questions, and by that they didn't have, if I'm correct, so they didn't have that page available when they launched the pop-up, etc. But now they tried to, referring to Mike's comments that it's unclear, they have all kind of figures and what's happening and what's not happening, etc., clarifying information, shortly put what's actually happening there. So I think they themselves started a little bit to correct the communications where we started from. So it came as a little bit as a surprise, then a lot of rumors, and of course, as already said, a lot of could have been done differently. So I'd just like to start from somewhere.
You know, I'm going to say, I'm going to put a spin on this, just because Facebook is so big. I wonder if maybe I'm giving them too much credit, that maybe they knew what they were doing, and they wanted to just see what the reaction was going to be to something like this. And maybe this was an experiment. I know the only reason I'm saying it is because, has anybody considered that? Because they are the leader in the field, and they get all of the, when they are the leader, we in the privacy community are very critical of Facebook, but they are the first. They're the one out there, leading the charge on all these areas and trying to be creative. And so sometimes maybe they just want to see how the world's going to react.
Yeah, and maybe the EU EEA is not the place to be experimental at the moment.
You know what's interesting about that, just as a thought experiment, is that if you look at say what the consequence has been, a lot of attention has been paid in terms of the increase in numbers to the sign up of users to other messengers. Now, if you look at it through a different lens, does that mean that there's a corresponding reduction in respect of WhatsApp user accounts? No, I think people would be quite reluctant to give up their WhatsApp accounts. Some might, but we're speaking about in general terms, largely on the basis of the network effect that's associated with so many people already being on the platform. So if you decide you're going to close your WhatsApp account, you're also deciding that you're not going to communicate with the people that you've used that platform to traditionally communicate with. And for many people, that's actually quite a broad range of people. And that's a rather regular way that they are communicating. So, the sense that, okay, let's see what the reaction is. Is it like what often happens with kind of privacy policies and terms and that, which is, oh, I'm outraged. This is such an infringement of my rights. Oh, okay, I need to message my best friend, so I'll WhatsApp them. It's that constant privacy paradox that you might bump into, and that may have been. I'm not saying that it might be part of the planning, that there was some awareness that there might be friction, but that it was expected, hopefully, that it would be manageable friction, because a lot of the history in these kinds of things tends to be that kind of manageable friction. It's one of the things where sometimes I've often thought of and compared data protection and the need for regulation. In many ways, it's a little bit like trying to inculcate good culture around environmental behaviors. I won't use plastic, but I'm hungry, and the place I go into in the convenience store, the only thing I can get is in a plastic container. So I'm hungry, I'm going to get plastic. It's almost exactly the same thing, which is why you wind up with regulations saying no plastic or whatever it may be. Data protection is exactly the same. That may be, Mike's absolutely right, that may have been one of the things that could have been thought of as part of what the thinking was before they embarked on this.
And there is another question that relates to another question we were discussing, debating offline, is do you see ads coming to WhatsApp in the future? And I think it relates to the business model again. How to make a return on investment on billions spent to buy WhatsApp. So that's how to explore, and maybe someone can answer about this specific question on ads on WhatsApp, but maybe also expanding a little bit on, should we pay for an app upfront for saving privacy? And if you pay for that, well, does it make privacy better in the app? So maybe a lot of questions, but business model for those apps is an interesting question. So if someone has an idea about future of adding ads in the WhatsApp
Gabriel, just
messaging.
I think this may be also connected to another question, another point we just received. I believe that the most secure one at the moment, as well as the most privacy friendly, is Solvit. For a small cost of €5 per month, you can avoid many a dash. So this may be related to the question you were doing. So we can also consider the fact that some of them are paid, but more secure, possibly or not. So I leave it to you all but I just wanted to interject also to add this point. Thank you.
I can start from the ads in WhatsApp. On WhatsApp, I don't know. Perhaps not as such. Not at least as in the middle of communications or something like that. But the first thing, of course, what they want is to have more information to target the ads on Facebook. And also we have to remember that Instagram is also part of the Facebook companies here. So they'll drive information, not the communications information, but the usage, etc. So that kind of information and that of course leads to those that affects also only those who use Facebook and Instagram. So, but anyway, even those who do not use, their information will be shared. So that's my guess, that not in the beginning, but will we ever see ads on WhatsApp? So don't know.
So I think one of the interesting things I came up with came up just recently in terms of the story told me, and this goes to, if you're deciding between different messaging apps, what, why, and where should you use one as opposed to another, and one friend shared with me that she uses WeChat as her messaging platform when she's going on a dating cycle with various suitors. And this is on the basis that your WeChat account is not linked to a phone number. So if you dump the guy, you can delete him from your contacts and he can't haunt you anymore. Which I've used that as an example just to show that there is there are different reasons why you might use different messaging apps, and people do so for the full range of reasons why they might be. And as you compare, each with the other, so the fact that you pay doesn't necessarily mean you get better data protection. The fact that something is end-to-end encrypted doesn't mean that data isn't a core part of what the value of that platform is. And sometimes you might use, say, Signal because, but they still use a phone number, for instance, presently in respect of how you register and use them. Whereas WeChat has got maybe certain data protection issues, but at the same time, it could be useful if you're, going on a dating frenzy and you want to, lose people along the way. So there's a variety of ranges there.
Well, I think, as of now, their policy says that we will not post ads in WhatsApp. But it does say that if we decide to do it, we will upgrade our privacy policy and let you know. So they've not ruled it out in the future. I think you probably find there are kind of three types of people. There are some who might say, I prefer to pay for the app and then have my data, including metadata, everything absolutely, private. There may be some who will say, I don't want to pay for it. I'm happy for them to use my content, send me ads based on my content and so on. And then there are some unreasonable people who might not want even their metadata used, but still want a free service. So the reality is, such a large business with so much of data, so much of storage, they have to monetize and they have to make money. And so we have to find a kind of optimal balance where privacy is protected to some extent, but they also have enough flexibility to monetize the service and make money from it.
Thanks, and I think it leads us to the last question. And I know we are 5 minutes before the 1 hour. It's already a long webinar on an interesting topic. But the last question would be: are the alternatives? Because everyone is considering. I'm considering personally to start discussing on Signal or even Telegram or another platform. But then, as Padraig was saying, you have the network effect. Maybe you just remain in the platform because you have older friends in this platform. So are the alternatives really better in terms of privacy policy? I think this is a good question, because ultimately if you switch, then if you have the same problem, then what's the purpose of switching? Maybe you just don't message, right? Or you use alternative ways. So I don't know if any one of you would like to go into this question of others being better, really, so that maybe users can say, well, maybe I would consider switching or staying.
Regarding the policies, I could start saying that WhatsApp's privacy policy is 20 pages and Signal's is like 6 and Telegram's is like 7 pages. So is that good or bad? I don't know, because at the same time you should inform, but not to be too complicated, as Mike said. But reading, for example, Signal's privacy policy, I know I'm not quite sure if it fulfills all the standards under the GDPR at the same time. So it's actually by comparing just privacy policies, I would say that you can't make the final decision as such. Then we come also to the security questions and usability, etc., etc. I do agree that it's a little bit problematic to have like at least 5, 6, 7 different kind of apps now what you have to use, because somebody uses one and the other one, and the clients have started to use different ones.
I think it's a more complex question than just looking at the level of encryption. My understanding is the level of encryption for WhatsApp is higher than Telegram, but Signal also encrypts the metadata. So Signal is probably at the highest level. But I think the bigger issue really is one, the fact that WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, and that Facebook is the big social media company, and you don't want them to share content with Facebook. And the other, I think, is the fact that when you become a big company making a lot of money and you have a presence all over the world, you are subject to a certain amount of government pressure. And there's also concern that those types of companies may do deals with governments on backdoor entries and things like that. So one very interesting thing: journalists in India, when they have to do calls, they never do it on WhatsApp. They always do it on Signal because they fear the government is spying on them through WhatsApp, and that's partly because there was that Israeli application Pegasus, which was believed to have been used in India against journalists and also against lawyers who represented activists and so on. So I think the issue is partly, I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket. Perhaps I'll use all three, and perhaps I'll use Signal for particular types of messaging, which is more confidential, more sensitive. So I have all three, and I mean mine is like 99% WhatsApp. But there are a few people who, when they talk to me, they say, I will talk to you only on Signal.
Well, I think we have some good conclusion remarks, and then obviously this is probably about conceptual decision to be taken. I do not care about who is behind the company using potentially some information. on whether you need to use a very confidential means of communication, and then you might have to look for more secure application if you have to protect some privacy, including confidential information such as medical and client attorney privilege. Thanks all for your insight. I think it was a really great discussion. Thanks for all of you to attend this webinar. Thanks to PrivacyRules to host this as usual. Stay tuned for the next one, and happy to see you for another topic on data privacy. Thank you, everyone.
Perfect, Gabriel.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you to you all and to our listeners for being with us. And bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.